Hi, I'm Deirdre Bialo-Padin of Biaalo-Padin Designs. I design and make hand-fabricated jewelry out of silver, gemstones, and other materials. I also do custom work, which means that I make fine jewelry out of gold and gemstones for special occasions such as wedding and engagement rings and anniversary gifts. I love to knit, and because I love to knit, I make tools and accessories for the fiber community. I make a variety of shawl pins, my handmade cable needles, and in response to some customer requests recently, I've started making spinning wheel orifice hooks and Portuguese knitting pins. In this video, I'm going to talk about why and how I became a jeweler and a metalsmith and give you an idea of what inspires me. To start off with, the women in my family love jewelry. We collect it, we share it with each other, and if we want to celebrate a significant event, we're going to buy a piece of jewelry. My family is creative. Some of us sing, some of us dance, but all of us work with our hands. My parents were both engineers, and they were avid tool collectors. And not just tools, they would collect hardware, machinery, kitchen gadgets, and they used all of that they collected. And you can see I have inherited their weakness. So these are not all of my tools. I have many more files and hammers and machinery in another room. To give you an idea of what it was like with my family, my mother, when I left home, gave me a set of pots and pans, but she also gave me an entire set of wrenches and a toolbox filled with tools, because she was the person in our family that did most of the repairs around the house. Now, my father was very proud of his soldering skills, and whenever I am working at my soldering bench, I think about my father and I think about the pride that he took in a job well done. My mother loved to knit, crochet, and sew. There wasn't much money when I was young, so she sewed most of our clothing during my early childhood, and she also taught me how to crochet and sew. My grandmother was a public school teacher here in New York City, and she was also a theatrical costume designer. And that meant that her apartment in Manhattan was this magical place where there were dress mannequins, sewing equipment, and fabric all over the place. And she had this huge library of art books and books on fashion and psychology. And in fact, after she retired, she spent the rest of her life writing a book on the history of fashion and specifically the philosophy of fashion. So my childhood was about hours spent going through my grandmother's books and draping and pinning fabric on the mannequins in her apartment, and then sewing clothing in my mother's sewing room. So how did I start making jewelry? My husband. My husband is a wonderful singer and musician. And listening to him fill our home with music inspired me to explore my own creativity. So about 15 years ago, I started taking jewelry making classes. And then about 5 years ago, what had started out as an avocation became a thriving business. While I continue to make variations on my more popular designs in the studio, I'm always working on new ideas. I have drawers filled with projects to work on. I have surfaces covered with projects that I am working on, and I have sketchbooks filled with designs. So, memories of my family inspired me to become a metalsmith, and because I have absorbed their sense of aesthetics, their appreciation for color, shapes, textures, memories of my family continue to influence how I see the world and how I design and make jewelry. My mother and grandmother collected fabric, and I use some of their fabric in my shop displays. My business logo includes some Morse code, and that's because my father, as a young man, served in World War II in the Philippines as part of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. And I still use some of my parents' tools here in the studio. So when I'm working in the studio, when I am holding and using my tools, I feel that I am honoring my family and that I am keeping their tradition of creativity alive as I make jewelry. I find inspiration for my work in the irregular surfaces of landscapes and gemstones. I'm fascinated by the unique patterns created during a gemstone's formation, whether it's an emerald's internal crystalline planes that look like shards of ice, the mysterious mountainous landscapes of picture jasper, or the tree or fern-like mineral formations in dendritic agate. And it's no wonder that I'm transfixed by the play of colors in Australian opals, seduced by the pinks and metallic greens of tourmaline, or the incredible range of colored sapphires. Because my mother loved color. Her wardrobe looked like a botanical garden in springtime. Nature and landscape also informs how and why I manipulate metal, because when I hammer metal, I'm trying to create dynamic undulations in the surface of the metal, a sense of three-dimensionality that echoes the mountainous landscapes and the rough terrain that I'm drawn to. I love the look and feel of richly textured fabrics such as slubbed linen, raw silk, brocades, and thickly embroidered cotton. And I collect fabric when I travel because I'm interested in the local history and culture associated with textile making. And I often reference the feel and appearance of textiles and nature in the construction of my work and how I treat the surfaces of my pieces. I have woven fabric out of silver wire because the woven elements catch the light and add a feeling of depth to the earrings and pendants. And I'm also experimenting with using actual fiber in my jewelry. I'm learning jumchi, a Korean paper-making technique reminiscent of wool felting. Jumchi uses mulberry paper, which historically was used in place of cloth to make garments. It's a sturdy material, and I'd like to explore the idea of using jumchi in jewelry making. I used to be a practicing attorney, and with both of my parents having been trained as engineers, perhaps it's not surprising that the problem-solving aspect of jewelry construction appeals to me. How do you turn an idea into a three-dimensional piece of jewelry? If it's a complicated, hollow form object, how should the components be put together and in what sequence so that the piece doesn't fall apart while it's being soldered? And if the design includes a gemstone, what kind of a stone setting will I make and how am I going to make it? Because I'm a metalsmith, if I don't have the right tool, I'll make or modify a tool so that it does exactly what I need it to do. And functionality prompts my creativity. For example, I started making hairpins because I needed to get the hair out of my face while I was soldering. And if I was going to make a hairpin, it had to be both functional and decorative. Once I started knitting, I think it was inevitable that I'd start making tools and accessories for the fiber community. As a beginning knitter, I'd forget to make buttonholes and sweaters. Then, when I started knitting lace, I hated tying big knots in the shawls because the knots hid the lace patterns, and there was always the possibility of causing damage to the delicate yarn used to make the shawl. So I started making my own shawl pins. I modified some of my hairpins to secure the garments and shawls I was making, and started to think about other designs for shawl pins. After a visit to a museum, I was inspired by Iron Age cloak fasteners, and I began to design and make penannular brooches, which are two-piece shawl pins. Because the pin in the stem is attached to the outer ring in a penannular brooch, you don't lose the pieces, and the brooch lays flat against the material, allowing a scarf or shawl to drape well. It's a brilliant idea that's over 1,000 years old, and a great thing to have lying around the house when you're a knitter. When I started learning to knit cables, I made a mess of things. I found the commercially available cable needles large, slippery, and awkward to hold, so I was always dropping the needles and dropping my stitches. So I decided I had to make my own cable needles. I was already making twisted wire hairpins because I had discovered that twists in the wire do a really good job of securing finer, slippery hair without damaging the hair. So I realized that I could apply the same design principle to making cable needles. So I make twisted wire cable needles in 3 different styles. They're attractive, comfortable to hold, and the twisted metal provides just enough friction to reduce slippage while knitting without damaging the yarn. And it was very exciting to have my cable needles featured in the fall 2019 edition of Knit Scene. Now I'm starting to make other tools for the fiber community. What I discovered is that at fiber shows, customers quickly recognized that I could make tools for their specific needs, and they realized they could start making requests. And that's how I started making stitch markers, Portuguese knitting pins, and spinning wheel orifice hooks. Customer requests continue to inspire me to be creative, and they provide me with an opportunity to experiment with different designs and materials. I've already got sketches for some new shawl pin ideas, as well as different kinds of fasteners for sweaters and capes. I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into my creative process. Thank you for watching.